You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. Deuteronomy 6:8 from the ESV. Welcome to another presentation of Hands and Eyes. I want to talk some more about Romans. Let's call this Repairing the Romans Road number 3. This will kind of tie into the first video I did a little bit, something I mentioned almost by accident. And I just want to talk to you. I've got another one really planned. I was trying to work on that one. I realized I need to do some preparatory work. I want to talk to you about how does the law increase sin. There's several ways in which that's said. I'll start with this one, Romans 5:12 through 14. Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men, because all sinned. For sin indeed was in the world before the law was given, but sin is not counted where there is no law. Yet death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those whose sinning was not like the transgression of Adam, who was the type of the one who was to come. There's a lot there. There's a couple of things I wish I had time to talk about, but let's just talk about this question. What does it mean that sin is not counted where there is no law? And how is that related to those whose sinning was not like the transgression of Adam? Well, what was it like? Who are these people? Okay, I've recently heard someone propose the answer this means babies. They don't really sin. They don't intentionally do that. So could that be the proper answer? I don't think so. There's totally no reason in the context to think of that. It just doesn't make any sense. The assumption is that Adam sinned self-consciously like an adult, so it must mean some other kind of person, and that's all that's left. And that's not the point. The point is that people sin differently before and after Moses, not differently before and after they're subjectively aware of communication and words that come to them, perhaps in the form of commands. So this does not work at all. But I bring it up because it's actually been seriously proffered. Paul is talking about, as I said there, history before and after Sinai, not biographies. It's not your individual experience or of any individual he's talking about per se. He's saying that this is what life was like before Sinai, this is what life was like after Moses and before Moses. Well, the other problem with this was no command given before Sinai after Adam? The command was given to Adam not to eat of the fruit. He ate of it, so he disobeyed a command. Well, what about this idea that there was no commands before the law was given? Well, that's just not true, and Paul can't possibly believe that. It's hard to believe Paul could think this. Look, let me just give a few examples. Divine commands known before Sinai. No one knows about clean and unclean animals, either from God directly or from an ancestor. Maybe Seth told him, Adam told him, maybe they had that going on. After all, I think clean and unclean animals probably originate from sanctuary animals. We find out that if we read Genesis 1 and 2, that cattle were already in the garden, so you have like a sanctuary animal versus an outside animal. But, that's a different lesson. Anyway, he knows about the difference. So where do you get that information? All that stuff in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, that changes it. Numbers, it changes a little bit because we find that Noah actually sacrifices clean animals that later are not allowed on the altar, but it's a different situation. But still, there's that shared knowledge. So no. And Jacob knew about the brother-in-law's duty. This is a law we don't really have to follow anymore, and wouldn't be mandatory at all. In fact, it'd be darn outright awkward and kind of against family values, so we now understand them, but that's a different lesson too. Anyway, Deuteronomy 25, 4 through 10, and by the way, that verse 4 is deliberate. That's not a misprint. I know it talks about an oxen being muzzled to thrust the grain, but that, as I'll argue in some other video, is actually related to the rules about brother-in-law. But brother-in-law was supposed to raise up a child for his brother if his brother died, leaving a childless widow. Well, Jacob's already talking about that mandatory ethic in Genesis 38:8, so that's actually not Mosaic, it's pre-Mosaic. And where could that have come from? And then God gave Abraham a comprehensive law code. Either gave it to him directly, or he gave it to Noah and it got transmitted, or he gave it to Seth. Look, here it is, Genesis 26:5. God says, Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, plural, my statutes, and my laws. So there's already an ethical system around. That's not what's new about Sinai. I mean, it might have been new in how it selected Israel, but that brings up my point. So that can't be it. Hard to believe Paul could think this, and I think there's there's a lot of other examples I could have given. So was no one judged for sinning before Sinai? Well, we know that's not true. I mean, Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, the flood. So people sinned, people broke God's commands, they had God's commands spoken and written. So there's just no reason to go in this direction. What could Paul possibly mean? I think a key is found in 2 Corinthians 3:9 and 10. For if the ministry of condemnation has glory, much more does the ministry of righteousness abound in glory. For indeed, what had glory, in this case, has no glory because of the glory that surpasses. Okay, so what we have now is so glorious that the glory of the past doesn't even count as glory anymore. That's how I understand what Paul's statement here. So look here, sin is not counted where there is no law. All right? I think we're talking about greater guilt. Compared to the kind of guilt that accrued after the law came, the guilt due to sin before the law came was virtually invisible. Now, the people in the flood weren't thinking that, and that kind of thing. Sodom and Gomorrah and all that is still true, but it's just that everything became much more intensified after Moses. All right? The way sin was counted became much more serious. So that's why Paul's speaking in such a great contrast. But what about this law before Moses? I mean, if there's law before Moses, how can Moses change everything? Well, he did change things. Adam sinned in the world sanctuary, the garden in Eden. Okay, he sinned in that sanctuary, trespassed, and then mankind lost access to the garden in Adam, and it was destroyed in the flood. God gave Moses the Ten Commandments and the blueprints for a new central sanctuary to house them. In fact, the instructions for that sanctuary are repeated twice in the book of Exodus. The Ten Commandments are only given once. So you almost have this, a case could be made that the sanctuary itself is more important than the Decalogue. I'm not sure you'd really want to go there. But I'm just saying, if you're going to talk about things in Exodus that are amazing and important and that our attention is drawn to, that sanctuary that was built in part to house those Ten Commandments, that's a huge deal. So after Moses, it was possible again to sin like the transgression of Adam. In fact, if you go to Samuel, that's exactly what Eli's sons do. They grab forbidden food from the sanctuary, just like Adam grabbed forbidden food from the sanctuary. You can read about this in 1 Samuel 1 or maybe 2. And they would steal food from God, and as a result, they lost the sanctuary, just like Adam and Eve lost the sanctuary. By the way, some background videos would help here. If you go see my video, The Central Sanctuary, Key to Understanding Scripture, it's a pretty short one, but very important. And then also, if you want to see how Israel was a new Adam, and thus, as we can see from Paul, able to sin like Adam did, you get this in Daniel chapter 7, my Son of Man 1, and then my second, that should be Son of Man 2, sorry. All right. But this leaves us with a question. Why would God intentionally aggravate the sin and guilt of humanity in history? And again, this is about a historical process. Romans 1:18 and following on, over and over again, is talking about how sin keeps getting worse and worse. Now, of course, this involves individuals sinning, but there's something more going on in what Paul's describing. And we've already talked about this verse. Here it is. Now the law came to increase the trespass, all right? Increase the world's sin. Sorry about my dog barking there. And then Romans 4:15 says it, and it's the same thing. For the law brings wrath, but where there is no law, there is no transgression. Again, that's a relative term. All right? You might say, if we wanted to use a different language set, there might have been kind of sin before the law, but there's no transgression. There's nothing to trespass. There's no boundary set in that literal geographical sense that existed at the time of Adam and then got restored in the time of Moses. Okay, and there Paul is saying you're not justified by law. That's not the law's point. The law is supposed to bring wrath. Well, why? Again, why? Through the law comes knowledge of sin. Now, this is the passage is most easily taken as like an individual sense that if you know something's wrong, you violate the law, and therefore you know what sin is. And I think this knowledge of sin should be taken the way that it says, like at the beginning, Adam knew Eve and they got pregnant. Carnal knowledge. He's talking about that through the law comes direct acquaintance and experience with sin. All right? The law aggravates sin. The law produces sin. The law, why would God do that? This underscores a question. Why would God intentionally aggravate the sin and guilt of humanity in history? Now, of course, people are the ones doing the sinning, not God. God is just giving them opportunities. Actually, He's being gracious with them. And as a result, it's kind of like a father rescuing a child and putting the child on his lap, and the child's able to reach the parent's face and slap it. That's kind of the way humanity's been. As God's brought us back closer to Himself, we've been able to spit in His face more accurately. So that's how sin gets intensified. The question is, what was the point of doing that? Why would God do that? But we'll try to answer that question in the next videos. See you then. Hope you have a great time. Until then.